She arrived at the wedding in silence, elegant, composed, and completely alone. But before she could even take a seat, eyes began to follow her, whispers spreading like wildfire. A billionaire stepped forward, his voice sharp with accusation, calling her a fraud, a crasher, someone who didn't belong. In a room filled with power and privilege, no one questioned him. Until a detective quietly stepped in. What he discovered didn't just silence the crowd. It shattered everything they thought they knew. But the real question is, why was she targeted in the first place? She wasn't supposed to stand out that night, but somehow she always did. For years, she had built a quiet, disciplined life. Early mornings, long hours, and a constant need to prove herself in rooms where she was often the only one who looked like her. She had learned to carry herself with calm confidence, even when the stares lingered a little too long, or the smiles felt a little too forced. That evening, the invitation in her hand wasn't just for a wedding. It was a symbol of everything she had earned, a place in a world that had never easily accepted her. She chose her dress carefully, not too bold, not too plain, something that said she belonged without saying too much at all. But the moment she stepped onto the estate, something shifted. Conversation softened. Eyes narrowed. A few people glanced at her, then quickly looked away. It was subtle, familiar, the kind of tension she had felt before but never in a place she was supposed to be welcomed. And standing across the courtyard, watching her a little too closely, was a man who had already decided she didn't belong. At first it was just whispers, quiet, controlled, but sharp enough to cut. People didn't approach her, they circled. Stolen glances turned into lingering stares, and those stares slowly hardened into judgment. A woman near the entrance clutched her purse a little tighter as she passed. A man by the bar paused mid-conversation, his eyes narrowing as if trying to place her somewhere she didn't belong. She kept walking, calm, measured, like she had done 100 times before. But then came the interruption. A voice, loud enough to stop the music in people's minds without touching a single note. The billionaire stepped forward, his presence commanding, his expression already set. He didn't ask, he accused. His words were polished, but the meaning was clear. She didn't belong here. The room shifted instantly. No one defended her. No one even asked a question. It was as if his wealth gave his assumptions weight, and her silence made her guilty. She felt it then, that familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear exactly, something deeper. The exhaustion of being judged before being known. Still, she tried to hold her ground. But he didn't stop. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel personal, but loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. He spoke about security, about protocol, about protecting the guests. Words that sounded reasonable, until you realized who they were being used against. And then security arrived. 2 men, large, alert, already looking at her like they had been told a story before they even saw her face. The air grew heavier. Conversations around them faded into a low hum, replaced by the quiet tension of people watching. Something unfold they didn't want to be part of, but couldn't look away from. She glanced around, searching for a single familiar face. Someone who might recognize her, speak up, say something. But no one moved. Not one person. Her grip tightened slightly at her side, but her voice never came. Because she knew sometimes explaining doesn't matter. When no one is really listening, one of the guards took a step forward. Slow, careful, like approaching. A problem that needed to be removed. Not understood. And just as it seemed like the situation couldn't get worse, a new presence entered the space. Quiet, unassuming, but different. A man dressed plainly holding up a badge. A detective. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. He simply looked from the billionaire to her, and then around the room as if reading something no one else could see. For a moment, everything paused. And then he asked a single question, one that didn't accuse, but didn't sound like it would end well for someone either. The kind of question that makes the truth impossible to hide. And suddenly, the night wasn't about her anymore. The room held its breath as the detective stepped forward, his calm cutting through the tension like a blade. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't acknowledge the whispers. His eyes stayed fixed on the billionaire. Then, without raising his voice, he asked for the estate records. A pause, just long enough to feel uncomfortable. The billionaire let out a quiet laugh, dismissive, confident. He spoke as if the request itself was ridiculous, as if his word alone should be enough to end this. But the detective didn't move, didn't blink. He simply repeated the request, slower this time. And that's when something shifted. A staff member hesitated, then stepped forward holding a folder no one had noticed before. The kind of silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, watching, waiting. The detective opened it carefully, turned one page, then another. His expression didn't change, but the air did. He looked up. Not at her, but at the man who had just tried to have her removed. And in that moment, everything flipped. Because the name on those papers didn't belong to the billionaire. It belonged to her. The same woman they had watched, judged, and nearly thrown out. The same woman no one defended. The same woman who had stood there, silent, while her worth was questioned in a place she didn't just belong in, but owned. A ripple moved through the crowd. Shock, disbelief, something close to shame. The billionaire's confidence cracked. Just slightly, but enough. Because for the first time that night, he had no control over what came next, and the truth was no longer something he could talk his way out of. No one spoke at first. The same room that had once felt so certain now stood frozen in quiet disbelief. The guards stepped back. The whispers disappeared, and the man who had tried to erase her from that space could no longer meet her eyes. But she didn't celebrate. She didn't raise her voice or demand an apology. She simply stood there, steady, composed, but changed. Because what happened that night wasn't just about being mistaken for a stranger. It was about being seen as someone who couldn't possibly belong, not because of what she did, but because of who she was. The detective closed the file, but the truth had already done its damage. The illusion of fairness in that room had cracked wide open, exposing something deeper, something uncomfortable. And as the night slowly tried to return to normal, it never really could. Because once you've seen that kind of silence, how quickly people believe the worst. How easily they look away, you don't forget it. She walked away from the crowd with the same quiet strength she arrived with. But this time there was something heavier behind it. Not defeat, but understanding. That this wasn't just her story. It was happening every day in different places in quieter ways. Moments where people are judged before they speak, dismissed before they're known, and doubted before they're given a chance. So the question isn't what happened that night. The real question is, how many times has this happened when there was no detective to reveal the truth?